Hi, I'm Whit Andrews. I'm a distinguished vice president analyst. I'm joined by my colleagues today, Gavin Tay. He's a vice president analyst, and Sumit Malhotra, who's a director in our HR practice. Today, we're going to talk about key takeaways from our recent Gartner Digital Worker Experience Survey. This is data that we gathered in 2019, and then we gathered it again in Q4 of last year. It's our 2021 survey. It's showing us some exceptional things. I'm located in Western Massachusetts in the United States. Gavin, Sumit, can you tell me where you all are located?
Whit, it's interesting you ask, every time I get on these calls, which, for you would be good morning, for me it's good evening. I'm often told I'm on the other side of the planet. So anyhow, I'm from the island city-state of Singapore.
Sumit?
And I'm somewhere in the middle of the time zone. I'm from India. I'm based in New Delhi.
And I want to point to what Gavin said, because I think it is important for us to recognize, people do tend to say that Gavin's on the other side of the world. From Gavin's perspective, I'm on the other side of the world. I think that's very valid. In fact, this data that we gathered, we did gather globally. So we brought in knowledge from China, from Gavin's island nation of Singapore, from India, as well as Western Europe and the United States. A lot of the insights that you'll hear about today and outgrowths from these insights is including particularly advice for attendees will be available at Gartner's Digital Workplace Summit. We'll be doing that in the United States, April 26th and 27th. And so if that's something that you're interested in, I hope you'll look into it in greater depth. One of the things that I really found fascinating about the results from the survey is it really set employers up to understand what they should expect from their workers during the next few years. So obviously, work has been radically shifted, and we've seen differences in where people work, what they work with, what they work on, how they relate to their applications. What should workers expect? What should employers expect from their workers during the next few years? Sumit, I'll start with you. What are you expecting people who employ others to experience in dealing with their workforces and digital technology over the next few years?
I think there were great insights coming out of the survey. Some of them were very tactical. Like we need to reduce the number of virtual meetings or the time spent in virtual meetings. There's been an overdose of it, but employees expect lower number of meetings. So I think that was some of very tactical takeaway. But I think a couple of things that caught my eye, which were very, very interesting for the long-term implications and how organizations design their workplaces or technology setup, were number one, around the diversity of impact on productivity of this whole experience of work from home. So our survey showed that there were around 29% people who reported that there is a increase in productivity while working from home, which is great, and shuts down any debate that leaders have around whether there was a broader decline in productivity, because we have a significant proportion of our survey audience who were also had no impact on productivity. But the interesting part was there was an equal number, around 1 in 4 workers who reported a decline in productivity. So I think the big takeaway as we talked to our clients was that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution in the future. So it's not going to be about bring everyone back to the workplace or go completely remote. It's going to be somewhere in the middle if you want to meet the needs of your workforce. So I think that was one of the big takeaways for me, and what employers should expect from the employees.
That makes sense. Gavin, if I'm an employer, what should I expect my worker to bring to the back to the office moment? So over the last year, we saw a significant back to the office work in Asia. We're beginning to see it emerge. A number of organizations have announced that Labor Day in the United States, which is in the fall, will be a watershed moment. Some already had begun to shift to back to the office. We're seeing more big employers say back to the office is important. Gavin, what kind of skills have people developed, and how should employers respond to the necessity to deal with what's going to probably look like a hybrid workforce for the foreseeable future? So what are the steps or decisions that an employer will need to be ready to make in order to take advantage of how workers have experienced a change in their relationship to their jobs and to digital technology over the last year?
Yeah, it's interesting, that today, 5th April, marks Singapore's first day that companies can open their doors without rostering. You can pop into the office without booking that seat, but obviously with all the rules, social distancing, contact tracing, and awareness of your whereabouts, all intact. But the interesting finding, talking about workers bringing back what they have now learned over the Great Reset, or what was the greatest fire drill of all times, would be something known as digital dexterity. I think in the prior survey, we found that, Asia and APAC, they seem that particularly, Asia and APAC, particularly China and India, showed the highest level of digital dexterity. By that, if we put a definition, it's the ability and desire to use new and emerging technologies for business outcomes. But now, in this latest survey result, it showed that workers are now so adept at picking up new things. They have that great desire to pick up new skills, technology skills, digital skills. And that will be something we expect they bring to the office. And ultimately, the fundamental reason, they want to see the company succeed. But on the flip side, while we expect all these workers to be so adept, accommodating with new skills around technology, the interesting finding is that if the applications that the organization provides them is one which they like and can help them do their work, they would stay twice as long with the company. But otherwise, we might see, and as is proven through this crisis, I think switching jobs might be somewhat of an easier thing to do now.
Yeah, and one of the things that you point out, there's a famous quote from William Gibson, whose first novel was Neuromancer. The future is already here; it's just unevenly distributed, and that uneven distribution is something that I felt emerged with real. The word I'm going to use is poignancy. It tugged at my heart to see how differently the disruption of 2020 was experienced within cohorts, within an organization. So we saw differences in by generation. We saw differences by business unit. We saw differences in vertical industries. Most notable, though, this comes back to what you just said. You have a moment today in your nation, which is an island, which is also a city, which is also a national government. Here in the United States, we have more than 50, right? We have 50 states, which are like provinces somewhere else, and each state has within it a city or multiple cities that are trying to exercise rules and keep people safe. So we don't have anything like a national day when you can come back to the office. This regional variation is something that really emerged vividly and is somewhat separate, I think, from the disruptions of 2020, but no doubt is exacerbated by it. What are the differences in regions or nations that struck you as particularly distinctive and notable? Sumit, I know that you had one that you took note of. What would you like to tell us about the distinction, the difference that you saw?
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me, again, I've come from the HR practice, so productivity is a hot topic among our clients. So one of the things that the clients have been asking us around, how do we track productivity of employees when they're working remotely or in a hybrid environment, as you called out? So one of the things that struck me was the weighting level of acceptability of the way employees accept monitoring of productivity. So a couple of things that are standard were measure my outcomes. That's acceptable.
Yeah.
Have managers have more frequent conversations with me. That's acceptable worldwide. So that's a global trend. But interestingly, countries like India and China, there was a very high acceptability of passive technology-driven monitoring, to the extent that 40% of the employees or workers in India that we surveyed said they're okay with their employers tracking their emails, chats, and any kind of internal communication they were having, which is surprising,
Yeah.
especially given the number of those who are comfortable with that kind of tracking in a country like France or Germany was low as 9 or 10%. So that was a significant variation. It's driven by generational breakup of these countries as well, which we can talk about
Yeah.
later. But that was the biggest thing, at least from my client's perspective, for me, that once you design a technology setup to track productivity as you plan for a hybrid work environment, that's something that you need to take into account, which is in addition to all the legal and data privacy norms, which vary widely across the globe. This is another thing that you'll have to account for, which is the employee preference and comfort also varies across the globe.
No, that's very true. Gavin, I know that a lot of your work here has been around this issue, this question of how organizations worldwide can leverage the lessons that emerge in Asia around digital dexterity. You just made reference to that. And I think that I've loved that lens that you've put on what we've learned and understood about workers in the Digital Worker Experience Survey in prior years as well. I'm curious to hear just you yourself. What do you think we can learn from Asia about what Sumit just laid out? So in Asia, as he pointed out, workers in India in particular are very comfortable with kind of constant, always on monitoring on work devices. Meanwhile, we know that in China, a lot of constant monitoring is okay, but device location monitoring is a little bit challenging. I'm going to set you up with a surprise after your answer, just so you know, because I've got some new data in about what HR executives think is okay. But I'm curious, what can we learn as when we look at this future, which is unevenly distributed, and there's a big chunk of future right there in Singapore and not that far away from you in China, on the other side of time in India. What can we learn from what workers are experiencing and what they approve in terms of the organizations watching over them? Does that make sense as a question, Gavin? Can you give us a sense of how we might predict the future or what actions we might take based on those insights?
Yeah, so everyone seems to label this, crisis the world was put through as the Great Reset. And by that, it seems to be everyone's on this level playing field now. There's no difference from what is North America or Europe or that of Asia Pac. But I think the survey data does show a stark difference in that workers in Asia, they love to bring their own tools. And that in these
Yep.
respective geographies, whether that be in India, South Asia, North Asia, they have their own tools. They have their own tools and their own flavors of tools. And they prefer to use those tools to do their work. And so the normal question that would have come, prior crisis would have been, oh, we're HQ'd out of North America, we're HQ'd out of, Europe, and we've got workers that are in China. How do we get them to use this same platform so we're all consistent? I think that question has to be answered in a different way now. That consistency may not be something we endeavor. I think the inconsistency is something we endeavor, and that the interoperability amongst inconsistent platforms across the world, but yet
Yep.
still have that means of collaborating. I think that is something we have always grappled with. I think it's more evident now, it's more prominent, and we would have to deal with
Yep.
that, longer term.
That's really interesting. So, and I think so when you talk about consistency and the necessity that we reimagine how we deal with digital work as a way of what I'm hearing you say, because you and I have had many conversations separate from just this conversation, of course. What I'm hearing you say is, over investing in consistency, which I believe it was Ralph Waldo Emerson said was the hobgoblin of little minds. So if we overinvest in consistency, we fail to take advantage of what many of our colleagues refer to. And Sumit, I'll ask you to hold me to the accurate description of this notion. We're seeing, Gartner is recommending that you think about radical flexibility. So, in other words, that the organization's responsibility is at least in part to make its workers capable of demonstrating radical flexibility. In other words, they need to be able to be intentionally inconsistent. So in other words, that inconsistency is not just to be embraced for its own sake, but that inconsistency can be reframed, turned inside out as the notion of radical flexibility, which brings us back to this issue of how workers were able to get the job done, able to drive forward the core endeavor in their organizations, whether that organization was government, whether it was commercial, non-governmental organization, nonprofit, educational, academic, no matter what, workers have really, they got sent out of the office, but they kept getting it done, no matter where they were. Again, no matter whether it was Asia, Western Europe, the United States, or elsewhere, workers have continued to deliver value for the organization, for customers, for constituents. This takes us to an interesting insight. Sumit, something struck you about how workers were experiencing this sudden, necessary radical flexibility, inescapable radical flexibility. Tell us more about what struck you there.
I think the point that I made earlier around diversity of response, as we said, equal number of people had productivity drop, and similarly, we've seen, as you pointed out, that irrespective of what the situation has been across the world for workers, they have responded in their own ways. To give you an example of the data that we were seeing, one of the reasons for being more productive for employees who were more productive in working from home was the space and the location. And one of the top reasons for being non-productive was the same reason, which is space and location. Which is interesting how we see the data and how it manifests for different employers. I think so. That's what I think the need for organizations to imagine this flexibility is, and the reason it's important today. And just to give you a little bit of background around what we've been doing in HR practice over the many years, we've been tracking why employees leave organizations or join organization. We call it as attrition drivers and reasons to join a new organization. And one of the things that stuck out to me in this data point was that we've always heard of reasons and advised our clients around you should focus on compensation, you should focus on work-life balance, you should focus on stability, and these reasons for joining an organization vary globally. So in an India market, growth rate is very important. But what struck me was 6 out of 10 employees, approximately, on both the questions we asked here, said that flexibility of when they can work and flexibility from where they can work, both of these would be important consideration for 60% of the workers as they choose their next position in the same organization or a job in another organization. And that is what is at stake for employers now, which is it's going to be something that it's not, to your point we started with, not something you expect from employees. It is something that you have to deliver to all your employees and your prospective employees if you want to grow your business and attract talent in the future.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. Again, that comes back to this idea of radical flexibility. So it's very easy for us to imagine that the first and last place that's to be addressed is this question of remote work versus in the office work, right? And that there's a lot of flavors that come together just on that. So I've talked to clients who've said, we're coming back to the office, but we're only going to come back 1 week out of 3. So we have 3 teams, the A team, B team, and the C team. Each team will be in the office for 1 week and 1 week only, right? So you can't come back to the office if it's not your week. So we've heard that. Talk to somebody, it's going back about 7 or 8 months now, who said, we're going to bring everybody back to the office. And if you don't come back, you're not working here. Very simple statements, as well as obviously very, much more open statements, more like, Gavin, what you described. I'm curious to hear. So Gavin, you brought up something that I think is important earlier. That's this idea of application effectiveness or application appeal as an element of whether somebody is going to pursue their ambitions within the organization where they are, or whether they're going to leave for another organization. I'm going to bring this together into kind of a typical super worker, right? So if you have a typical super worker, somebody who is going to pursue their ambitions inside your organization, somebody who believes that they were able to maintain or increase their productivity during 2020, somebody who is able to work on any number of devices, who's able to use anything that they've got for their own, for the benefit of the organization, including their own applications, maybe their own devices, things like that. How would you tell an IT department, Gavin, to think about their duties and responsibilities to, kind of getting the obstacles out of the way for this digital worker? Does that make sense? I mean, what falls to the digital workplace leader that he or they can actually do that makes this worker really be able to reach their potential in the organization?
Yeah, so we're back to that digital dexterity conversation again, right? As part of the eagerness to want to be up to date to the latest, tech stuff. I think there will equally be, workers that are struggling and they're lapsing behind. So I think the goal here is, while, we're all familiar of raising that typical IT help desk ticket to solve a problem, but there are indeed now more workers that are equally adept at answering your questions. So I think the goal is getting IT support down to 0, but get the peer-to-peer IT support up to 100. And there are indeed, I think, through this new digital world that we live in, I think workers have more empathy to want to reach out, want to help, and indeed have that, that genuine need to get a worker up to speed with anything. I think it shouldn't be as much of a problem as it was in the past. I think today workers are eager to jump in, and perhaps, we can certainly label them as, hey, you are that number one superstar for this month to have solved all our IT problems. And everybody might want to be that superstar, to come. So I think digital dexterity comes, as we always say, in a set. There will be those that are so eager to pick up new skills, but there will be those that are also eager to want to share the skills that they've learned with others that are lapsing behind.
It's interesting. You raise. I was talking to my son over the weekend. My son is 20 years old, and he called with good news. He had good news about employment. That was great. I had some good news about school. That was great. Both employment and school, by the way, are remote for him. He's been in virtual school now since about a year ago, and virtual employment. I don't even know how many laptops we've been through. One of the people he worked for gave him a laptop for work, and of course, it was useless for anything else. But that was fine. I mean, that was part of the expectation. But the news he called about was really interesting. He called to tell me about 2 badges that he'd gotten on Reddit. And I didn't even know there was such a thing as a badge you could get on Reddit. I was like, that's awesome. Tell me more. He had gotten a new level of access to Reddit for 3 months because of the popularity of some content that he'd placed out there, which was very similar to what you're saying, Gavin. So it was content about a game. The game is semi-virtual, and as a result, there was his experience as a radically flexible volunteer worker in a crowdsourced environment had resulted in this very meaningful feedback that he had gotten from the community. And that was, quite distinctive, right? So I felt that I could congratulate him genuinely on that outcome. That was amazing, and that's not that different from what you just described, Gavin. The idea that part of our endeavor is that we are supporting our colleagues and fellow workers. It's interesting. One of the things that we saw change in the last year was a distinctive shift towards IT solutions to solve challenges that people face with their digital technology. It was notable. So it went from IT-based solutions went from about 41% up to about 55% of people's first choices. So I have to be honest with you, Gavin. Your idea that we're going to go to 0% for IT solutions for that support and 100% for worker-supported solutions experienced kind of a setback during the pandemic. But what I think that you did say that is dead on was the diversity, the variety of solutions that people wanted. So we saw people establish much greater interest in a wide variety of different methods for accessing this support. So in other words, a year ago or year and a half ago in 2019, the top 3 methods that people wanted to use to get access to help for the digital technology, the top 3 methods were accounted for more than 80% of the respondents. So in other words, 80% of the respondents picked one of 3 methods of getting support for their digital technology. Top 3 methods only accounted for a little more than 40% of respondents a year and a half later. So in other words, there was a tremendous flight to the various different methods that IT, or as you point out, Gavin, your coworker, your friend, your relative can help. So that was a tremendous shift. We saw a fall in kind of the, I'm going to ask my coworker over the cubicle method, for example, but we saw a rise in, we're going to use frequently asked questions. We're going to use community-based approaches. We're going to get access to this information in another way. So that it was an interesting shift in, kind of that kind of manifestation of workers' inclination for that radical flexibility. So we're limited on time in the conversation today, and I want to make sure that we're thinking about what the people who are watching and listening to us can do themselves. I'm intrigued about this, both for their own persons, so what they can accomplish, what they can do within their own lives, and what they can do to advance the endeavor within their organizations. So what they can do for themselves, what they can do for their companies or the governments or the other kinds of institutions that they're working for. I think that I want to point out one of the things that makes us a little nervous about the response of productivity. So Sumit, you pointed out that about the same proportion of people, especially those who are working from home more, about the same proportion of people said they're more productive as the proportion who said that they feel less productive. And that was something that I think is very important for us to look at. When we see why people feel more productive, those top 3 reasons, the top 3 reasons are all related to time. So the top 3 reasons are related to a reduction in commuting time, greater flexibility in terms of the hours that they work. And by the way, in India, we saw greater desire for the later shift. In China, we saw a very substantial desire for later shifts. But here's the part that makes me feel a little bit spooky, a little bit scared. Also, people are working more hours. So now when we say, are you more productive? We mean, are you getting more done without investing additional time? But for a lot of the workers who were responding to our survey, they were more productive, but that was because they put in more hours. So I'm getting now to this question again of what people should do for themselves and what they should do for their organizations. I'm going to ask that specifically, Gavin, of both you and Sumit. Here's the thing. I would say the number one thing that people can do for themselves is recognize that they should commit as little extra time as possible. They should seize the flexibility that's available to them now on the hours that they work or the location that they work, even the device that they work with. But they should just as actively commit to radical flexibility for the value of their personal lives. This is a challenge, right? But one of the best managers I've ever worked for left visible in her calendar that she would work late, and left visible in her calendar that she took time for yoga in the middle of the day, right? So she was manifesting that radical flexibility right there for her reports to see. And I try to do the same thing for myself, right? It's spring, and in North America, that means that the warblers, who are a particularly colorful family of birds, are migrating. It only happens once a year, and I'll only have that happen for me a few times in the rest of my life. So I'm making time to go out and see those warblers. That's what I'm doing for myself. For my organization, I'm trying to manifest this radical flexibility. Even though I'm not in IT, I'm trying to demonstrate through my own activity that I am flexible in these ways. And I know that, Sumit, I've worked with you a little bit. Gavin, I've worked with you a lot. And I've tried to demonstrate that radical flexibility by meeting you in your time zone, and by telling my organization that that's important, that they should do that. Gavin, Sumit, what is one thing that you think a worker listening to this should do for themselves? Gavin, you first, if that's okay.
I'm glad you asked. I think if at any point in time, it is now, and sitting is really the new smoking. If you're going to be spending, a ton of hours sitting at your desk and saying you're productive, you may very well be, but I think that back is going to break. And as we speak with many organizations around the world, they're shifting the onus of employee wellness to the employee rather than the employer undertaking that task of getting your back straightened out with an orthopedic surgeon. So I think carving out that time that you did say middle of the day, maybe it's not middle of the day. I did do my run just before I got into this little chat that we're having today, and I think it's a must, and it's your discipline.
So there you go. So intentional discipline towards self-valuing and towards retaining that personal identity that's separate from the organization. Sumit, what's one thing that the people watching this can do for themselves? And then Gavin, I'm going to come back to you with the question of what they can do for their organization. But Sumit, go ahead with what one thing is that the people watching this can do for themselves.
And I was smiling. I'm a victim of the bad back problem during the COVID. So, yeah, Gavin, great point. I think one thing I agree with what you said, with in continuation of allocating time to recreate or take a break, to have a walk, to avoid the back injury. I would say just take time to upskill yourself, because I think you were mentioning about commute time saved in countries like India is a big productivity driver, and we are not utilizing, most of the people I talk to, we're not utilizing that for personal development or for exercising. It's going to work. That 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on the city that you are in, you save it and you work at that, hence the productivity is up. So my request to everyone listening would be focus on upskilling, because one of the things that we noticed in the survey as well was that the realization that digital technology and digital skills are important for the success, my personal success, but also for my organization's success, is very, very high. And organizations have struggled to drive that realization in the past, to tell employees learn a skill which they don't visibly see currently is important. So once you've realized it, that it's important, it's a great time to learn a new skill, be more digital dexterous. If you're a leader, as Gavin said, that's going to be a very critical capability for the future.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I've been mentoring startups during the last year and a half, and I've learned a tremendous amount from working with people whose passion and intensity is frankly greater than mine, and their willingness to tolerate risk, is vastly greater than mine. So that's been tremendous. That's been a value that I've been able to bring to my professional life, but to my personal life too. So, Gavin, what should somebody watching this do for their organization? So, what are the insights that we've talked about today that you think that they can now turn into real action for their organization?
I think I would bring up the last point. If anything that you can bring, it reminds me of the fact that we're always being asked to equip ourselves with CPR skills. It's that medical first aider. You can save a life. In
Sure.
this digital world we live in, I think being that medical first aider that anybody should now be that mental first aider. So if you see colleagues of yours that are just falling behind and you see the signs, I think it comes in many formats, but over time, I'm sure this mental first aider will help many of our colleagues, be back on track again. And it's interesting I say this because I was reminded that, did you read about the candidate in the UK that's actually vying for mental first aiders? I said, oh, no, I didn't read about that. I just equipped with CPR. Equipped to provide help for anybody who needs that sort of help. So I think if we want to become productive, which seems to be an overused term these days, we should in fact think about mental first aiding. Help your colleagues as much as you would in any other situation. Get them back on track by getting them not to do more work, but to be balanced with equilibrium, whether it be work, whether it be play, whether it be exercise, and certainly not sitting too long.
Intentionally keep people in your heart. Obviously, the organization will benefit from that, and it's a compassionate perspective to bring. You're absolutely right, and that comes back to what you were saying back at the very beginning when you were talking about the empathy that people express for one another. Certainly, that empathy is being expressed in person. It's being expressed without personal connections. And in organizations, I often talk about the fact that work is a family. It may be a temporary family. It may be a dysfunctional family, or it may be more functional in some ways than families of origin and other families of choice, because it can be very narrow. But what you're making a case for, I think, is to expand beyond that narrowness and to understand the value of the people on your larger team. That makes a lot of sense. Sumit, what's one thing that people can do for their organization, and then we can wrap up? It's been a wonderful conversation, but what are the people listening and watching this? What can they do that will make their organizations better capable of embracing this notion of radical flexibility, or something else that's emerged from this space?
I think the biggest thing individuals or leaders can do for their organizations would be start a conversation about shift in mindset, because we always advise our clients that radical flexibility and designing an organization around it would require technology, would require processes, it would require setting up new work design. But I think the most important thing would be the shift in mindset, to your point, that the flexibility of time is easier analyzed but difficult to deliver, just because leaders around the world are not used to not having common time with their teams getting work done, or having the flexibility in the old world, as we said, to ping a team member and say, hey, how's this work going? Or to your point, right, we're working globally now and accept a global flexibility. Then you have to have a mindset to work with people across the time zones and accept that in all walks of life, be it in terms of work, be it in terms of career progressions, and be it in terms of work or team structuring. You have to be open to having employees from, like, a team that we have on the screen, someone from Singapore, someone from US, someone from the India, just coming together and working on a project. So I think that's one thing we should have a conversation with as employees, with each other, but also as leaders among leadership forums in our organization.
That makes sense. I'm gonna add to that as we finish up. I find myself, I've taken, I'm the chairman for Gartner Symposium in the United States. It's an international event, but I'm chairman for the United States. I have been 2019, 2020. I am again in 2021. So I'm taking a lot of inquiry around virtual events. I've also taken a significant amount of inquiry around virtual collaboration. I'm working on a note now about innovation in a hybrid workspace. And I find that one of the pieces of advice I keep coming back to that's related to what you just said, Sumit, and I think is related to what you're saying as well, Gavin, is this idea of atomization of the work that's happening. So the work up until now, in many cases, that's been collaborative, has been kind of has worked off a de facto centralization and a de facto combination. So we've all had a model up until now where you say, well, when we get together, we will do all these things, and especially when we are together in the same place, all these things can happen. And I'm telling organizations, take those things, make the list of things, discover which of those things, which elements of collaboration of working together could take place in a more atomized fashion, where an individual piece or an individual task might be completed remotely, whereas another one is the one where you want to put the absolute greatest value of the in-person or the simultaneous but virtual collaboration, or the virtual collaboration which is asynchronous. I think that this experience of the disruption of 2020 has in many ways forced us to re-understand and reimagine all the aspects of work as something which is atomized, which is divided into individual components. And we can absolutely maintain some separateness going forward. We can, learn to do that in a way that's not artificial, but instead is organic. And we can do so. That leads us to a compassionate position like the one that Gavin lays out. That leads us to the ability to allow workers to really demonstrate their greatest strengths. It gives us greater strength in terms of geographical diversity, neurodiversity. It gives us the ability to employ different specific or individual skills within our worker base or within a team, or different skills that occur at the team level. So that forced atomization is something which is, I think, a manifestation of that forced and intentional radical flexibility that the world can really take advantage of now. Again, I'll mention that if these are themes or aspects of your job that you're looking for a conference for, we do have our upcoming digital workplace conference in the United States in April. We will do it later in the year in Europe. Both of those are virtual, and we welcome your attendance at them. Gentlemen, Sumit, Gavin, it's been tremendous. I really appreciate the conversation. This is really, I think, demonstrated the depth of change, but you've also given really solid advice that people on this call can do for themselves or can do for their organizations. Thank you so much for joining me today to elevate Gartner's research in this way.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.